6:06 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Thank you very much for joining us on Nashville's Morning News. It is Tuesday, August 27th, along with Johnny B., Ken Weaver, and State Senate Majority Leader Jack Johnson is joining us on the Newsmaker Hotline. Going to talk about, of course, yesterday's special session. Not as many fireworks in the State Senate yesterday, at least not yet. Jack, but let's talk a little bit about what happened yesterday in the Senate, because as you and I discussed yesterday, the fireworks in the Senate are to come. You folks there in the Senate, you didn't change any of the rules, the procedural rules, which is what was going on in the House of Representatives. So talk a little bit about what happened yesterday.
Yeah, good morning, Dan. Always good to be with you. Excuse me. You're exactly right. We were in our floor session yesterday afternoon lasted about 18 minutes. And so it was very quick. That is quite common whenever we convene any legislative session, including a regular session. Obviously, you come in, it's your first day. There's not much to do. We did not amend or modify, change our rules of order for the Senate, so there was not that to deal with. What we basically did is come in. We did have to adopt rules of order, but we kept our rules the same. And then we passed all the bills and resolutions that have been filed on first consideration. And that was about it. And after that, we adjourned and went back to our offices. The House, as you know, they did change their rules. And so there was a lot of debate. And that's why they were in for a much longer period of time.
Is that what you call it, debate? Because I saw a bunch of whining from people on the left. I want to play, though, there was a moment yesterday, which I thought was, obviously interesting to say the least. Janice Bowling, she was one senator who spoke up, and she did ask to adjourn. This is what it sounded like.
People in my district have spoken loudly on this issue, and the overwhelming consensus is that we face no emergency or immediate danger. And I must be honest with this chamber, I echo their sentiments. What I do find concerning is that we find ourselves in the midst of a session that presents such a danger to public safety that only days ago Metro Nashville Police advised that anyone who works in the Nashville downtown area should stay home during this session for their own safety. Additionally, there are bills filed now that we must consider outside the normal rules of order in a very abbreviated amount of time that these bills seek to address a myriad of very complex topics. These topics, during the course of an ordinary session of the General Assembly, would deserve robust debate through a committee process. This would be accompanied with valuable feedback from the citizens of this state as they follow the legislative process.
And so ultimately, what you wanted to do was you wanted to adjourn. That ultimately did not happen. Complicated legal and procedural processes. But, one of the questions is, and people have asked this question about gaveling in and gaveling out. How do you see the next several days playing out on your side of the chamber?
Sure. And let me say that my dear friend, Senator Janice Bowling, I've certainly received calls and emails expressing the same sentiment. We've all received lots of calls and emails all over the map in terms of people who want us to come in and pass lots of legislation, and then others who think we shouldn't even be having this special session. And I respect all of those viewpoints. I think what you will see over the next couple of days is there's over 100 bills that have been filed in both the House and the Senate. Nowhere near that many bills are even going to be seriously considered. I think you will see the number of bills that are actually contemplated and acted upon be a fairly narrow focus. We're going through that process now. We will pass all of these bills on second consideration when we convene later this morning at 8:30. And then the committees will begin meeting, and it'll be up to the committees to decide, are there bills that they want to take up and pass? And if so, they'll make it to the floor. If not, then I think one thing you're going to hear a lot of, Dan, over the next 48 hours, 72 hours, is people saying, you know what, I like this bill, but I think we should take it up in January. You're going to hear that on a lot of bills. There will be some, I think, that we will pass over the next 2 or 3 days. We're here, and the governor's laid out a call, and now we just have to go through the legislative process.
The Democrats did introduce SB 7029 on your side of the chamber. The House version would allow a process for law enforcement to petition a circuit court for a temporary mental health order of protection for a person who they say poses a significant danger of causing personal injury to themselves or others by having a firearm. Basically, it would be up to a judge to decide if you should have a firearm. It ultimately, at least to me, it seems like a classic mental health order of protection, or as some would say, a red flag law. Whatever you want to call it, we're going to see the Democrats doing this. They have a House version and, of course, a version there in the Senate. What are your thoughts on this? Is that something that you think might make it out of committee?
I do not, Dan. I don't think there's any chance of a bill like that advancing, and let me explain why. You're right. You're spot on. That what you just described is the epitome of what is known as a red flag law. And the way it is characterized by gun control advocates makes it sound, oh, so common sense. Why in the world would we not want to take weapons away from someone who's a threat to themselves or others? Well, Dan, here's a simple answer for that. Being mentally ill is not a crime. It is not a crime to be mentally ill, and we shouldn't make it a crime. Because what you're doing when you say we're going to dispossess this person of their firearms, you're taking away their constitutional liberties when they have done nothing wrong. We have orders of protection for people who are accused of, or certainly convicted of committing a violent crime. A veteran coming home from Afghanistan who's struggling with some degree of PTSD and is seeking treatment for that shouldn't be dispossessed of his or her constitutional liberties because they're struggling with mental illness. If it rises to that level, Dan, then they probably need greater intervention from the healthcare system. You don't need to pick and choose certain constitutional rights that you're going to dispossess them of. You should provide and make sure that they're receiving the intensive medical intervention. And if that includes some degree of commitment, voluntary or involuntary, then so be it. Separate them from society. But we shouldn't allow government to come in and willy-nilly start dispossessing you of certain constitutional rights just because you're mentally ill.
6:13 on Nashville's Morning News. State Senator Jack Johnson, Majority Leader, joining us here on WTN. I want to play something for you. This is Governor Lee. Back in April.
But in Tennessee, right now, if a husband threatens to hurt his wife, an order of protection would temporarily restrict his access to weapons to protect the spouse. If that same man threatens to shoot himself or a church or a mall, our proposal will provide that same level of protection to the broader public.
Now, one of the things that I'm hearing, and you would know more about this than I would, of course, is that the governor now seems to be, what's the right word, softening his stance on his support or desire of red flag laws. I don't know how much in communication you've been in with the governor. I believe that he's heard loud and clear how Tennesseans feel about all of this. But would you agree in your dialogue with the governor's office, has he softened that stance?
I would say this in my communications with the governor and with his staff. I don't think his support for a mental health order of protection has in any way waned. I think he still very much thinks it's the right direction to go. But the governor does recognize that there is very, very little support for such a bill in the General Assembly. As you said, the Democrats have filed it. And I encourage your listeners to watch closely and see what happens over the next few days in both the House and the Senate. And you will not see that bill or any variation of that bill advance out of the first subcommittee in the House or any committee in the Senate. We don't have subcommittees in the Senate. So it is not going to advance. It's not going to pass. There's very little support for it. It's bad public policy, and it's unconstitutional. Any constitutional scholar who's being honest with you will tell you, especially in the wake of the Bruin decision from the United States Supreme Court, that they're constitutionally suspect at best, blatantly unconstitutional at worst. So why would we waste the precious little time we have, if we're going to be in special session, debating a law that is unconstitutional and ineffective? Might I remind you, Dan, the RAND Corporation, anyone listening can go find this online. They did intensive research in terms of the 18 states, I think it's 18 or 19 states that have some variation of a red flag law on the books. There's no discernible evidence whatsoever that they reduce violent crime. So they're ineffective and they're unconstitutional. I say we move on and start talking about something else.
Well, and the Associated Press, Senator, also had an exhaustive investigation into that, and they found the exact same thing. I want to play for you some audio from yesterday's festivities in the House of Representatives.
Again, I'm silenced indefinitely. Outrageous. This is outrageous.
Where in these rules can we hold the speaker accountable for abusing constitutional rights and misapplying the rules based off of a member's skin color?
That's not democracy. That's not who we are supposed to be.
You know, so we can't bring any signs in here. Can people still bring guns in the committees? Is that still, that's
balcony last warning, next warning, you all get removed.
Senator, what are they doing? I mean, it's almost like, and I've got my own opinion, which people know, but in your opinion, what are they doing? Because they know that they're not going to get what they want, which is, you know, red flag laws and beyond. So it seems to me like this is just a bunch of, you know, what's the right word? Grandstanding.
That's exactly what it is, Dan. What you're seeing there are people who would rather make themselves the center of attention than they would to actually talk about good public policy. And we spent a good bit of time so far this morning talking about things that won't happen, like red flag laws, gun control, that type of thing. I think that you will see a good, positive, productive conversation take place over the next 2 or 3 days and into January when we reconvene, where we, as the Republican supermajority, we are committed to finding ways to make our communities safer. We really are. I just don't think taking guns away from law-abiding citizens is the way to make your community safer. I think you should focus on the bad guys who commit the crimes. Mental illness is a component of this, and so you're hearing a lot of talk about mental health. We don't do a good job in Tennessee right now of making mental health care available to people. We can do better than that. It's going to cost some money, and we're going to have to change a few things, and we're going to talk about that over the next couple of days. I don't know how much we'll get past, but it will be a launching pad for a broader conversation when we come back in January. We're going to continue. You touched earlier, and thank you for reminding folks, we've already done a tremendous amount in terms of making our schools safer, making sure there's an SRO in every school, putting Homeland Security, state Homeland Security, not federal, state Homeland Security agents in all 95 counties to coordinate with the local law enforcement in schools. We've done so much already, but we're going to keep going. So these people, these Democrats that you played the audio from, they're going to yell and scream and try to make themselves the center of attention. But we as Republicans and our supermajorities, we're going to continue to do everything we can to make our community safer.
On the other side of the building there, Scott Sapicki in the House, he has some legislation. He wants to require SROs in all schools, including elementary schools, which is something that some in Metro don't want. They think that it's militarizing elementary schools and so forth. Do you think that is an idea that will pass both chambers in this special session, requiring SROs in every school?
I think we need to look at it. And I don't know, Scott is a great friend and he is a great legislator, and I'm aware of that legislation. It is unimaginable that Metro Nashville would refuse school resource officers that we, being the state, are willing to pay for to put them in to protect our kids in Metro Nashville elementary schools. All three of my kids attended Williamson County schools. They had an SRO in their school every day, and I want to tell you, they love their SROs. My wife and I felt better that there was an SRO that was there. To have the far left saying that putting a school resource officer, someone in there to not only protect the school, but to have camaraderie with these kids and help with other issues that go on I can't imagine why Nashville would refuse that. So yes, I think we need to look at requiring them. These school districts are political subdivisions of the state of Tennessee. We have every right to require them to do that. And I think we need to have that conversation. As you know, there has been some backpedaling by the administration officials in Metro Nashville schools relative to that. Now they're saying, oh, it's a staffing issue or whatever. Well, you can solve that. If you want to make protecting these kids a priority, you can find the people. We're going to provide the money, and you can get them in these schools, and they should do it.
Well, and I told folks yesterday about Deputy Stephanie Reber out there in Sumner County, an SRO who saved a little kindergartner from choking. And there's several different stories like that here in Tennessee over the last couple of years, these SROs saving kids from choking. Okay, I've only got like a minute left. A great conversation. What are we going to see today and tomorrow and the rest of this week?
So much like a regular session, we convene this morning. The Senate convenes at 8:30. I think the House goes in on the floor for floor session at 9. Again, the Senate will be very brief. We'll go in, do our administrative procedural motions, pass all the bills that have been filed on second consideration. That then makes them eligible to be referred to their appropriate standing committee, is what we call it. So if it's a criminal bill, it'll go to the Judiciary Committee. If it's a mental health bill, it'll go to Health Committee. We have committees scheduled throughout today and tomorrow. And so there won't be much going on the floor, but there'll be a lot of stuff, a lot of conversations taking place in committees throughout today and tomorrow. And then we'll come back on the floor Thursday and we'll contemplate whatever's made it out of committee.
All right. Thank you very much, State Senator Jack Johnson, Majority Leader Jack Johnson, joining us on Nashville's Morning News. Good luck today. Thank you very much for joining us. It's 6:23.